As part of our investigation, we completed a vulnerability assessment of the Francis Scott Key Bridge ourselves to determine how susceptible it was to collapse from a vessel collision, taking into account engineering and shipping advances since the Key Bridge first opened in 1977. This vulnerability assessment is essentially a mathematical risk model used to determine how susceptible a bridge is to collapse from a vessel collision, and it's not new. The American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, or AASHTO, developed and published the vulnerability assessment calculation for new bridges on the National Highway System in 1991 in response to our investigation of the Sunshine Skyway Bridge collapse in Tampa Bay, Florida. The state of Maryland was on AASHTO's executive committee at the time and served on AASHTO's Highway Subcommittee on Bridges and Structures, which developed those standards in 1991 and revised them in 2009. Included in the 1991 standards was a recommendation from AASHTO that all bridge owners conduct a vulnerability assessment of existing bridges to evaluate the risk of catastrophic collapse in the event of a vessel collision and take action. AASHTO reiterated that recommendation to states again in 2009, and I want to read the quote from the AASHTO guidance in 2009. All remaining existing bridges over navigable waterways with commercial barge and ship traffic should be evaluated using a vulnerability assessment in accordance with risk analysis procedures contained in this guide. The vulnerability assessments would meet NTSB recommendations to AASHTO, FHWA, and other federal agencies for improved bridge safety based on previous vessel collision accidents involving bridge failures. AASHTO continues on. Based on the vulnerability assessment evaluations of existing bridges within the state system, a screening process based on the estimated annual frequency of collapse can be used to identify and rank high-risk bridges and to prioritize vulnerable structures for potential rehabilitation, retrofit, peer protection countermeasures, or replacement. The Maryland Transportation Authority never ran the calculation on the Key Bridge, and as of October 2024, they still haven't on the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. Had they ran the calculation on the Francis Scott Key Bridge, the MDTA would have been aware that the bridge was almost 30 times greater than the risk threshold AASHTO sets for critical essential bridges. 30 times greater. And almost 15 times greater for Pier 17, which the Dolly struck, as well as Pier 18. What's frustrating is, not only did MDTA fail to conduct the vulnerability assessment on the Key Bridge, they did not provide, nor were they able to provide, the NTSB with the data needed to conduct the assessment, including the characteristics of vessel traffic passing under the bridge, vessel transit speeds, vessel loading characteristics, waterway and navigable channel geometry, water depths, environmental conditions, bridge geometry, pier protection systems, and ultimate lateral capacity of the bridge piers. We asked them for that data. They didn't have it. We had to develop that data ourselves with the help of our federal partners at the Federal Highway Administration. And I want to take a moment to thank the team at the Federal Highway Administration for all their assistance on this investigation. We conclude in our report that had the MDTA conducted a vulnerability assessment of the Key Bridge based on recent vessel traffic, the MDTA would have been able to proactively identify strategies to reduce the risk of a collapse and loss of lives associated with a vessel collision with the bridge. Like the Key Bridge, other bridges throughout the United States were designed before AASHTO's 1991 guidance. To understand the scope of that risk, we asked the Federal Highway Administration to identify bridges that cross navigable waterways and are used by ocean-going vessels like the Dolly, and gather information about protection devices in place for those bridges, like dolphins, like fender systems. We then narrowed that list based on when the bridge was built, whether it had a vertical clearance of at least 80 feet, and whether it had substructures such as piers in a waterway. We also evaluated vessel traffic transiting under the bridges.